Everyone wants to help others, not so. We are there to help those in need. In fact, we even commend those who are helping others. No one ever says, no, you shouldn't feed the poor. Stop doing that. That's wrong. No one will ever say that. Everyone supports caring for the poor and humanitarian aid. There are so many non-profit organizations, for example, out there in the world, aren't there? There's thousands and thousands of them, from wealthy philanthropists to disaster relief teams to the local soup kitchen. Why is this? Why do we seem to instinctively have this desire to help those who are poor and those who don't have? It seems to be this universal kind of character trait or virtue in our human race. And of course, maybe there could be different reasons for that, but as Christians, we know intrinsically the reason is because why? We are made in God's image, right? We are made in His likeness, a God who has a great heart for the poor, a God who is a God of love, a God of kindness, and a God of compassion. That's ultimately why people care for the poor, isn't it? Because it's a strange irony that people can kind of be very much anti-God in many ways in their lives. They can still drink and get drunk. They can still swear and have terrible language. They can still be promiscuous in their sexual lives. They can be godless on so many fronts, and yet they'll still help the poor, They'll still be kind to the poor. It's really wired deeply into our DNA to be kind and to want to help others because we are made in God's image. Now, yes, in many cases, perhaps the motive for that is wrong. Some people do it just to look good. Some people do it just to get a tax cut. Some people do it because they want to earn their own righteousness. They want to earn their own place in heaven. I mean, we know the typical scenario is people come to church and they give their tithe into the plate that goes around, which is why we don't send a plate around. I think that's a terrible practice. Some churches even send buckets around. Can you believe that? Shame on them. But I would have to say, shame on the people who attend those churches. If you go to a church and they're passing a bucket around, that's the first sign and only sign you need to get up and walk out. But that's besides the point. But people often will give money to the church to ease their conscience. And so, yes, many people do good for the wrong reasons, but it doesn't negate this universal reality of how we seek to want to help others. And so as Christians, we particularly feel that, don't we? Not only because we're made in God's image, but because we've been redeemed. And we feel it's part of God's people. That is part of our duty. That is part of what we ought to do. It's part of our greater Christian responsibility, part of loving one another as God has called us to do. And sometimes we can be frustrated in that desire to help others because you may be well aware that there is so much need out there. You have the beggars on the streets. You have the beggars coming to your car door. You have people phoning you to donate money to this cause. You see adverts of starving children, etc., etc. There's so much need out there, and you're kind of frustrated. Well, where do I begin, and how do I give in ways that can truly be helpful? But I think also, on the other hand, even as Christians living in this world of materialism and consumerism, we can kind of tend to be a bit close-fisted with our stuff and our money, and even affected by that kind of culture and be maybe slightly less open-handed than what we could be because we begin to absorb this self-centered consumer culture. And so for us as Christians, in fact, though we are created and redeemed and have double reason to be giving, we don't always do it, and we don't always know how to do it. And so today, as Paul continues to instruct Timothy on how the church, the household of God, should conduct itself, he gets very practical, and he helps us in how we can truly be wise and willing in our giving. Are you ready for that? Let's read chapter 5, verses 1 to 16 of 1 Timothy. This surely is something that affects all of us, by the way. We all are able to give and are in positions and have been in positions where we haven't known how to give or what to give. Well, let's read verse 1. Do not rebuke an older man, but encourage him as you would a father. younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, younger women as sisters in all purity. So right there, Paul begins by addressing the relationships in the church. He is narrowing down, particularly now, on how we interact and relate to one another within the church. And you notice that he speaks about how the way we should treat one another is much like a family. Do you see that? How he should treat older men as a father. He should treat older women as a mother. He should treat younger men as brothers and younger women as sisters in all purity. And so there is respect and there is propriety. There are boundaries in the way we should be interacting with one another. But we should be caring for one another. We should be seeing one another as family. That's right up front. We should be caring for one another in that kind of way and viewing one another in that kind of way. That in other words, we should be having relationships. You notice that in the church, like in every direction. We should be interacting with people older than us. We should be interacting with people who are the same age as us. That the church is meant to be intergenerational. It's not meant to be just the teenagers doing their own youth thing on a Friday night. Not meant to be just the retired people doing their Tuesday morning Bible study at the church and never the two shall meet. No, we are a family. Yes, there's space for those kind of specific age-related ministries, but we are to interact with one another. That's why we particularly must at least gather on a Sunday all together as all ages. At least worship together for some of the time as we do with all the children in song and in prayer, etc., then go to separate teaching. We are a family. That's what we are as a Good News Bible Church. Take it or leave it. But that is clearly God's design in any case. So sad when you walk into some churches and the family's just divided. Okay, parents go here, children go there. Like that is completely against God's whole design for church. Yes, it's harder to worship together, but that's what God's purpose is, that we learn to be a family and we treat one another accordingly. And so it's a great privilege to be part of the church, therefore. But so you notice, Paul is reminding Timothy that it's about relationships, interpersonal relationships with everyone in every direction. That everyone in church matters. We can't just be exclusive about who we're going to interact with. And then he hones in from verse 3 on a particular group of people, in particular need in the church. You notice that. He hones in on the widows. So from verse 3, let's continue to read. And so honor widows who are truly widows. But if a widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to show godliness to their own household, and to make some return to their parents, for this is pleasing in the sight of God. She who is truly a widow, left all alone, has set her hope on God, and continues in supplications and prayers night and day. But she who is self-indulgent is dead, even while she lives. Command these things as well, so that they may be without reproach. But if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for members of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Let a widow be enrolled if she is not less than 60 years of age, having been the wife of one husband, and having a reputation for good works. If she has brought up children, has shown hospitality, has washed the feet of the saints, has cared for the afflicted, and has devoted herself to every good work. But refuse to enroll younger widows, for when their passions draw them away from Christ, they desire to marry, and so incur condemnation for having abandoned their former faith. Besides that, they learn to be idlers, going about from house to house, and not only idlers, but also gossips and busybodies, saying what they should not. So I would have younger widows marry, bear children, manage their households, and give the adversary no occasion for slander. For some have already strayed from Satan. If any believing woman has relatives who are widows, let her care for them. Let the church not be burdened, so that it may care for those who are truly widows. So wow, you notice that, Paul gets extremely practical and detailed here. in this section about widows. I mean, he gives so much attention to it. It seems quite out of place. I mean, even more attention than what he gives to the qualification of elders and deacons, or about teaching or about false teaching. He really seems to double click or triple click on this issue. So already that highlights the importance of caring for one another in the church, but particularly caring for those who are in great need, like widows, those who are maybe more marginalized in the church, those who have less basic support in the church. That God, it matters a lot to God that we as God's people care for those who are really in need. And one could even take it further than just widows. One could say even for those maybe who are divorcees and who are single moms or single dads. Even for those who maybe are single and not yet married and facing many pressures and many struggles. Those who are students maybe living and studying away from home. I mean, there's so many cases where people are particularly in need. And so surely from the outset, what Paul is wanting us to realize, we can't just come to church and go and not know people, not be looking out for people who are particularly in need, who are on the fringes, who don't have the basic support that they need, and where the church should come in and help them. How can we be part of a church family like this and just come and go and just worry about our own problems? We can't do that. Surely that is the emphasis that comes across just first off, as Paul gives so much detail to this practical matter of caring for widows. We've got to have an eye for others. We've got to have a heart for others. We've got to be going up to people on a Sunday before church and after church to chat to them, to find out about how they're doing, and even people who we don't know. People who are older than us, go up to them. People who are younger than us, go up to them. Get to know how they're doing, to see what their needs are. Because we are, after all, a family, as he has just made clear, mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters. We could all sing that song together, you know. We are family. But I won't, because this has been recorded, so I definitely better not. There are two perhaps broad principles that Paul then supplies us with here for helping us in the way we can care for those in particular need as Christians. The first point is he helps us or reminds us that our caring should be in the right direction. What I simply mean by that is that you notice that he begins verse 3, which I've already prepared us for, by saying, honor widows. And that's the point, that we need to recognize that as Christians, we have a great responsibility towards one another. You know, we can feel, as I said, that where can I begin my help in caring for others? Because there is so much need. Well, what Paul is helpfully directing us to is that there is need right in front of us as Christians in the church. And that's where we should be starting practically and even financially to be helping others, is with those within our church family. Not to the exclusion of beggars on the street or other forms of charity or other missionary organizations. But the principle is this: we must have our giving and our caring pointed in the right direction. That is beginning with our own church family. God has brought us together, that you are not part of the Good News Bible Church or whatever church you are a part of outside of God's sovereign hand. He has placed you in this church so that you can be cared for by those in this church, and vice versa, so that you can care for others in this church not so. You as an individual are specifically part of this for that reason. And God has placed you here because He believes you've got gifts that can help others, or there are others here who've got gifts that can help you. That's why we're here. And so it's so important to recognize that this is where we can start. We can start by honoring one another in need, by honoring, giving according to what they need in the church, right here, as a church family. I mean, that's what Paul seems to indicate in the way we should view one another. And as we approach this matter of how do we help everyone? Well, begin with the church. In the context even of giving, he says this, Paul in Galatians 6, and let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up. So then, as we have opportunity, let us do good to everyone, and especially to those who are of the household of faith. So it's like, whoa, like, are you saying we're going to form like this holy huddle? Like we Christians just to stick together, that maybe we become like an Amish community? Is that what we're saying? No, we're not saying that at all. But what we are saying is we need to apply wisdom to this matter of giving. And the Bible is giving us some great wisdom that our caring must be aimed in the right direction, that we begin with the family of God. That's where we can help most practically. I mean, that's where we can help most meaningfully, can't we? Because you then can actually have a relationship with the person you are helping. You can know them. You can come alongside them in many ways rather than just giving them bread or throwing them money. You can actually care for them. You can actually encourage them. You can visit them, etc. And so it just makes so much sense that we can begin our caring meaningfully here amongst one another. Have we seen that? Have you seen that as an older person, as a younger person, as a young family here today? That here is where our caring begins, with one another in that way. And so that is just by way of really first principle, really just an introductory principle that Paul is highlighting here as he gives so much attention to our care for widows in the church, and saying that's where we need to recognize we can begin to care meaningfully as our care is pointed in the right direction there. But secondly, and more so, and the greater matter here is that our caring needs to be done not only in the right direction, but then also with the right discretion. That it's a matter of, again, applying wisdom to who we give to and to how we give to them. You notice that Paul makes clear, firstly, that there are maybe certain widows in the church who maybe aren't eligible for being cared for by the church. Now that sounds a bit harsh. But he says in a number of places, first of all in verse 4, but if a widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to show godliness. Obviously speaking about a Christian family, to their own household, and make sure that as children they give return to their parents, and if their father has died, in other words, they take the responsibility as children of the immediate family for their mother or their father, whatever the case may be, who is widowed. For this is pleasing in God's sight. And so what Paul is saying is that the immediate biological family has a responsibility and relative to take care for the widow. That not only does it give an expression to your own godliness, it's the way as a Christian you can live out your Christian faith by caring for your family. And perhaps maybe he especially considers, knowing the dynamics of what family can be like, how family can be wrought with hurt and separation and broken relationships. And how maybe there can be a situation where you can feel, but you don't know how my father or my mother have been. You don't know how they've treated us. And maybe there's been this complete breakdown in your relationship with your mother or your father, and you actually feel they don't deserve your help. And so Paul is saying here, but that's the point, you see, that the gospel has got to transform your heart. It's got to enable you to forgive even in a family situation where there is that hurt and brokenness, and be able to demonstrate that godliness, be able to demonstrate the gospel, and you still, against maybe what your heart is even still feeling, seek to serve and care for your estranged mother or father in their time of widowhood. And so it's a great opportunity to show godliness. It is pleasing, furthermore, in God's sight that we do that. It is honoring to God. But also, it means the children can kind of pay back the parents. The parents have been feeding you, looking after you, caring for you. I mean, look at this, guys. Today I got some Father's Day socks even. They say, Rad Dad. I mean, those are the kind of ways that children can pay back their parents, right? For all that you've done for them. Jokes. But it is true. And so he just sort of lays a few reasons there why it should be just natural, even if it's hard. Because of estranged family relations, we need, as Christians, to be supporting our parents when they're in such a state of need and widowhood. And so that's what he then defines it in verse 5. And so she who is truly a widow left all alone, which he had already said in verse 3, honor widows who are truly widows. So he makes this distinction in this chapter between widows and those who are truly widows. Is he being mean? Is he being discriminatory? Is he being prejudiced? No. He's being practical. He's being wise. Because those who are simply just widows, those who have family who could support them financially, giving them home and food, etc., need to do that. But it's those widows who are left all alone, who have no children, who have no relative to support them. They are the ones that the church must prioritize to care for. They are the ones who are truly widows on their own, without any other means of help. Now, why is this? Well, it makes sense because we as a church can't care for everyone, can we? As we've said, there's so much need. We wish we could help everyone, but we don't have the resources. Not even the richest man in the world, or maybe he can solve the problem of poverty. I don't know. And in the church, it's the same. We don't have limitless resources to be able to help everyone. And so there needs to be a place where those widows or those in need who have families need to help them first. And so that's where the leaders, and as Paul is instructing Timothy, the elders of the church need to exercise discretion in who and how we help certain people in need. But it's not just in seeking to help those who maybe have God's provision of common grace in their lives, of having family, of using that resource. And so in other words, it's not only seeking to use discretion in ensuring the immediate family are taking responsibility for the widow as a test of whether you help or don't as the church, but there's another test here. It's whether the widow themselves is taking responsibility for their own lives to the best of their ability. In other words, it's how is this widow living? What is their character and their godliness like? It's not just a free handout, it would seem. It's not just indiscriminate. Because you notice he then goes on to say that the one who is truly a widow is the one who is left all alone and who has set her hope on God and continues to pray in supplications day and night. So it's a widow who is on her own and who is living a life of dependence, who is still living a life of faith in God, who is trusting God. I'm sure it's easy as a widow, particularly if your husband has been taken or your spouse has been taken in an untimely way, to be bitter. And yes, you will go through a season, as you go through grief, you go through a season of shock and then denial and then anger and then depression and then hopefully eventually acceptance. But maybe for some, they've just remained bitter. They've remained hard toward God. They've remained self-pitying. They've distanced themselves. They have chosen to continue to turn away from God and not accept His providence, albeit untimely, in their lives. And so it needs to be a godly woman who is seeking God and trusting God as her ultimate hope. Who more than that, as he goes on, verse 6, but and who isn't self-indulgent. For those who are self-indulgent are dead even though they live. I mean, Paul seems very insensitive here, Does he have no feelings for widows and for what they might be going through? So what is he saying? Well, he's saying that the widow or the person concerned needs to be living a life, as I've said, of Godwardness and not of self-centeredness. It is true that when you have helped others, perhaps in a church context or even outside, there can be this expectation that, well, or even the sense of demand that they should be helped. There can be this sense of just sitting back, of just almost being lazy and insolent, and demanding and expecting everyone to simply come to their need and help them. Where, quite literally, they're not willing to lift a finger in any way. I mean, you know how many almost come into churches and view churches as a charity house, that the church is there just to give and give and give. And how many stories you've been spun by people who've come in, perhaps even off the streets. And all the while, we know that, and you see them later, that they've just used what you've given them, even money-wise, for drugs or for alcohol. How deceiving people can be when it comes to their need. And so he's warning against that. Those who maybe just sit and mope, those who just simply sit and demand. Those who are unwilling to lift a finger in any way to help themselves, who are just self-indulgent in their situation. He is saying are dead even though they live, perhaps referring to the fact that their very conduct then, this very incident of widowhood is a test of their faith. And it is proving that perhaps they have no faith, that they are not responding in a way to albeit a great calamity in a way that is godly. They are responding to it in a way that is ungodly. And so perhaps it's showing that even though they are alive physically, they are actually dead. They're not actually a Christian. And so Paul is, he's giving us a hard time here. He's making it difficult for us to care because we've got to use discretion. He's putting a responsibility not only on those who should be caring, but also those who need to be cared for. There's responsibility on both sides. But that is the Christian life. That is how God works. It's God's sovereignty and human responsibility. We can all tend to be selfish and not want to help others, on one hand. Our flesh and our world can drive us in that direction, even as Christians. I mean, he goes on then to say again that Timothy must command these things so that the people may be without reproach. So this is imperative. But if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for members of his own household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. He's saying, so first of all, if you as a Christian don't help your immediate family in need, just like the widow who does nothing to help themselves in their own particular predicament and takes no responsibility and just demands, so those who have no responsibility for the immediate family are in fact also maybe showing that they are not Christians and are simply playing some other game. And so what Paul is highlighting, the situation of need in our life, situation of loss, situation of trial, it's just that it's testing our faith. How are we going to respond? Are we going to go out of our way to help others, even when it's hard for us, even when they've hurt us? Are we, even though we are hurting and struggling, are we going to be willing to get up and take responsibility for our lives? We can think, sure, I thought Christianity was all about love. Isn't Paul being a bit unloving here? Well, it's interesting what Paul prays as he writes to the Philippian church for them about their love. This is what he writes. And it is my prayer that your love may abound more and more with knowledge and all discernment, so that you may approve what is excellent. It doesn't say, may your love abound more and more in feeling or more and more in, I don't know, what else we may put there, but in knowledge and all discernment. He is saying that our love needs to be shaped by truth, needs to be shaped by wisdom. needs to be shaped by caring in the right direction and caring with the right discretion. I mean, did Jesus himself, when he walked this earth, help every single person that he saw? Did he? No, he didn't. He could have. I mean, he was God, but he didn't. Yes, he had a particular redemptive purpose that he was living out, but still, love doesn't mean that you simply have to help every single person. No, actually, love is best when it's focused in the right ways, and that's what Paul is trying to show us, that we need to help the right people in the right ways. That is truly loving. You know, it's a kind of a bit of that touch love scenario that we know with raising children or dealing with alcoholics or drug addicts. You can't just keep on giving them what they want. You've got to say no. You've got to have boundaries. Otherwise, you're just supporting them in their sin. And that's what Paul is trying to get at you, I think, is that in our community, we can't be supporting one another in their sin. Love doesn't do that. Love takes responsibility and allows other people to take responsibility. That is what is truly loving. That is how God's love works. And so maybe what Paul is doing here is testing our view of love and reshaping our view of love. Because our view of love can far easily be more formed by Hollywood and by the world. I mean, we all know how people say love is blind, you know, and how when young people can be in love and they think this person is the one for me, and everyone else is screaming, no, and their parents are on their knees praying, no. It's because they can't see it. The obvious things that perhaps are genuinely wrong with this other person that they are seeking to follow. But they're just so drawn in by their feelings, but I love them. Well, it's the same principle here. We've got to be circumspect and wise. We've got to be good stewards, even of our love as Christians, and of our help and of our care. That's the whole emphasis of this passage. And he then goes on from verse 9 to 16 to reiterate some of these same truths, as he particularly then deals with the situation of younger widows and how too the same principles apply, that one needs to be showing godliness in their lives. And so he suggests that maybe you support those who are over the age of 60. Now that is not like set in the sand, that if you are 59, sorry, can't help you, you know. No. It's the principle of helping the older people who've been able to live life and able to prove their godliness for one. But also because if you are around 60, let's be honest. I mean, no offense, but you're slightly less eligible for remarriage, right? If you are a widow. But those who are younger, as Paul then says, are far more likely to get married. So don't support the younger widows. Allow them to get married, and then they can have a husband and a family and children, etc., and in that way be provided for. Help the older widows. Very practical. And then those who've also had time to prove their godliness. To prove their godliness, where he says those who have a reputation for good works, brought up their children, has shown hospitality, has washed the feet of the saints, has cared for the afflicted, and has devoted herself to every good work. Wow. I mean, that's a high standard. He's almost giving the same qualifications for helping a widow to choosing an elder. So what he's saying is his godliness is expected of every one of us. No matter what your age, no matter what your life stage, no matter what your circumstance. God expects godliness from every single one of us as Christians. We're not exempt. You can't blame our circumstances, as difficult and hard as they may be at times. And while there may be seasons of emptiness and dryness, there ultimately should be this pattern, this trajectory of our lives. And so, in those ways, he's urging us to help those who have shown their godliness and to be circumspect, therefore, about how we help. There's a responsibility on those caring and a responsibility on those being cared for. And so having said all that, bring this together. So Paul has been very practical and very deliberate, recognizing the real need that there is in people's lives. Let's be honest, life has been hard for some people. Let's be honest, life is hard for those who are widows, and we have a number of them in our church. Some have been widows for a number of years. Some have been widows only more recently. And being widows sometimes, and being on your own, it is sadly maybe easy for us to overlook them because they're quieter, because they're single, because they just come and go, because they're in the background. And Paul is urging us to not do that. He's urging us to care for them. He's urging us to consider what they may go through as a widow. He's urging us to kind of put ourselves in their shoes so we can truly care for those who are truly widows. You think of what a widow has to experience. Think of all those years of relationship and marriage with this one person. Yes, there's had ups and downs. Yes, there have been fights and there have been joys and there have been tears. But overall, it's been years of relationship that have now come to an end. There's loss, there's separation, there's emptiness. You know, marriage is about the two becoming one, and you become like one with this person, and now you feel like a spare part because your other half and maybe your better half is gone. Their sense of security is gone. Their sense of identity is gone. Their sense perhaps even of financial income, or their means of financial income has gone. It's not easy to be a widow. It's not easy for them to fit in socially because they're so used to interacting as a couple and now they're on their own. There are all those ways, and so we need to be going out of our way to recognize that and to come alongside them. And I'm thankful for in this church how that is happening. How there are cases of that where there is care, where there is going out of one's way. But I believe we can always be doing more. And more people can be coming alongside and caring. And so what Paul is highlighting here, this is not a peripheral responsibility, for one. Widows are important in the life of the church. As important as the pastor. As important as the Sunday school teacher. As important as the person playing the piano. As important as those who make coffee after church. And we need to be proactive then. That's what Paul is saying. We've got to be proactive. We've got to come alongside and actually help them. Not just feel like helping them or pray about helping them. We've got to be burdened for them. And perhaps what needs to be said, for those who are widows, or even for those who maybe are on your own as a divorcee, or maybe you're just struggling as a student away from home, whatever your particular situation of separation and loss and in need of support is, that ultimately we recognize that, our comfort is in God. That's what he encourages those who are truly a widow to do, is to set their hope on God. That's what you need to do. Set your hope on God. He knows your situation. He knows your loneliness. He understands it. And he doesn't just understand it from a knowledge point of view because he knows all things and because he's sovereign and even planned the death of your spouse and determined that date. But he knows it because we know in Christ, God has come and lived in our sinful, broken world. He's understood the pain of suffering and loss. He lost his own father, Jesus did, earthly father. His mom, Mary, was a widow. But more so, even on the cross, as Christ experienced that the separation from his heavenly Father, as he took upon our sin, and as he cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me? As the Father turned his face away. God is not immune. He's not insensitive. He understands exactly our pain. I mean, remember, even on the cross, despite everything Jesus was going through, he looked down and saw who? He saw his mother and the disciple he loved, who is John. And he said to Mary, Mary, behold your son. Saying, see John now as one of your children. But more so, he then said to John, John, see your mother. In other words, he wasn't going to leave even in his hour of greatest need. Jesus didn't even leave his widow mother uncared for, unattended for. He was thinking of her and ensured that John would now take care of him. And it's interesting what we read in that incident in John's gospel is this. It ends by saying, and from that hour, the disciple John took Mary to his own home. God has got your back if you are a widow and alone today. He's completely caring for you. He loves you more than you know. And so yes, while it may be hard and while it may require seasons of praying day and night, as he says of the widow here, yet God is hearing your every prayer day and night, and He is with you. And there's, of course, that great hope that Christ's death has ended all death one day. And one day we will be in heaven. One day, if your spouse is a believer, we're not quite sure what heaven dynamics are going to be like, but you're going to be there. And will we recognize one another? Will we know our spouses? Perhaps we will. Hopefully we will. But I can say this much, because there's not marriage in heaven, right? Even if we don't, we will be as whole and complete and full and satisfied, even more than in our very best moments in marriage together, when we see our Lord Jesus Christ and the bride and the bridegroom joining together into the eternal wedding feast of the Lamb. That is our great hope. Let us stand together, and as we pray, and as we come to sing our closing song, there is no other name. Lord, we come to you today, and we ask that you would fill our hearts with the assurance of your great love for us. Of your great love for us. Give us hearts that take responsibility for those who we should be caring for. Give those who are in need of care the courage and